my mother put a sign around my 7-year-old daughter's neck. It said, "The mistake." I walked through that front door with 2 grocery bags cutting into my palms, tired from a full shift, thinking about nothing except getting dinner started. And then I stopped, right there in the doorway, because standing in the middle of the living room was my little girl, Lily, head slightly down, arms at her sides, wearing a piece of cardboard hanging from a piece of string around her neck. Handwritten letters, block capitals. The mistake. My mother was standing a few feet away, arms crossed, completely composed, like nothing unusual was happening. Like this was just another Sunday afternoon. "She needs to understand her place in this family," my mother said. Her voice was flat. There was no anger in it, no hesitation. She said it the way you'd say the weather was cold outside. The bags hit the floor. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. I stood there in that doorway, staring at my daughter, and something cracked open inside me that I had spent years keeping sealed. I had swallowed so much in that house. So many quiet humiliations. So many dinners where I sat invisible. So many moments where I told myself it was fine, it was just family, it would get better. But this was not about me anymore. This was my child, and that changed everything. My name is Renata. I am 34 years old. And what happened in the weeks after that moment changed my life and my daughter's life in ways I am still learning to understand. I grew up without much. Not poor in the dramatic sense, but without the kind of cushion that made life feel safe. I paid my own way through college, took out loans nobody helped me repay, worked 2 jobs in my second year to keep my head above water. After school, I built a career in medical billing, quiet work, numbers, codes, insurance claims. Nobody's impressed when I describe it at a dinner party. But I am good at it. I have always been good at it. And for a long time, that was enough for me. I had Lily when I was 27, in a marriage that lasted 4 more years before it didn't. The divorce was not dramatic. It was just sad and slow and final. Afterward, I made a decision I would come to question almost immediately. I moved back in with my mother. Temporarily, I told myself, just to rebuild, just to save money, just for a few months. Me and Lily in the small back bedroom of a house I grew up in, surrounded by all the old dynamics I thought I had escaped. My brother Devin has always been the one they celebrated. He was the athlete, the one with the scholarship, the one whose wedding my mother planned with the kind of attention and energy she had never once directed at me. Devin's kids are referenced by name in every conversation. Devin's wife is introduced with warmth at every gathering. Devin's life is the story my mother tells when she wants people to be impressed by her family. I was always something else. The responsible one, the quiet one, the one who handled things and didn't ask for recognition. I paid my own bills. I raised my daughter mostly alone. I never called home asking for money. I never asked for anything. And yet, somehow, the less I asked for, the more invisible I became. I wasn't loud or flashy. I knew that. But I had been quietly building something they never thought to look for. And my grandmother, my mother's own mother, was the only person in that entire family who had ever truly seen me for what I was. If your family ever made you feel like your love or your child was an inconvenience, hit subscribe right now. Drop a comment and tell me I'm not the only one. Let's go. It was a Sunday. Devin and his wife had driven up with their 2 kids, and the house was full of people by early afternoon. Aunts, cousins, a couple of neighbors my mother liked to have around when she wanted an audience. The kind of gathering where everyone performs a little, where the family presents its best version of itself to anyone watching. I came in late. Not by much. I had covered a half shift in the morning and picked up groceries on the way home because I knew we were running low on things. I was tired, my feet hurt, but I was trying. When Devin's kids had arrived earlier, I heard about it later from one of my cousins. My mother had crouched down with her arms open. She had hugged both of them for a long time. She had gifts for them, small wrapped things she had clearly prepared in advance. She had beamed at Devin with a particular pride she saved only for him. When I walked in with Lily, my mother glanced over once and went back to her conversation. I didn't say anything. I took the groceries to the kitchen and started putting things away. That was what I did. I kept moving. I filled the space with usefulness and I kept quiet, and I called it keeping the peace. I had been doing it for so long I barely noticed anymore. I don't know exactly how long I was in that kitchen. It might have been 10 minutes. It might have been 15. At some point, I dried my hands on a dish towel, walked back toward the living room, and stopped in the doorway. Lily was standing near the couch. Her hands were at her sides. She had a piece of cardboard hanging from a string around her neck. Block letters. Dark marker. The mistake. 2 of my aunts were nearby. One of them let out a short, uncomfortable laugh and looked at the wall. The other one stared at the floor like she suddenly found the carpet very interesting. Nobody said anything. Nobody moved. My mother was standing a few feet back watching me, arms folded. I crossed the room. I crouched down in front of Lily and lifted the string over her head carefully, like I was diffusing something. I held the sign in my hand and looked at her face. She wasn't crying. She was just looking at me with those big, quiet eyes, confused in the way that children are when adults do something that makes no sense, and they haven't learned yet that some things adults do will never make sense. "You okay, baby?" I asked her. She nodded slowly. I stood up. I turned around. And before I could say a single word, my mother spoke first. "She needs to understand her place in this family," she said. Same flat voice, same crossed arms. "She's going to hear worse in life. Better she learns it from family." I did not scream. I wanted to. Every part of me wanted to. Instead, I stood very still and looked at my mother's face and felt something settle inside me that was colder and calmer than anger. Something that said, "This is not over. This is just beginning." I looked around the room slowly, and that was when I noticed her, a woman sitting in the far corner away from the noise, whom I had never seen at any family gathering before. She was older, well-dressed in a quiet way, and she was watching my mother with an expression I could not quite name. Calm, still, attentive. Like someone who had come for a specific reason and was seeing exactly what she expected to see. I didn't know who she was. I didn't ask. But something about her presence, so composed and deliberate in the middle of all that noise, made me feel like it was not accidental. The weeks after that Sunday were a slow and careful cruelty. Devin's wife made an announcement at dinner about 3 weeks later. She pulled out her phone and passed it around the table, showing photos of a rental house in the Florida Keys. A pool, a private beach access, a screened porch big enough for the whole family. She was talking about dates, about who would take which room, about the drive versus flying. I sat at that table and waited. I waited for someone to say my name, to ask about my schedule, to mention whether Lily had ever seen the ocean. Nobody did. After dinner, my mother found me in the kitchen while I was loading the dishwasher. She leaned against the counter and said it simply, without apology, "It's expensive. And honestly, you two complicate the group dynamic." That was the whole sentence. She poured herself a glass of water and walked away. I stood at the sink for a long moment with my hands in the soapy water, staring at the drain, and I thought about all the years I had given that woman the benefit of the doubt, all the times I had told myself she was just practical, just direct, that she didn't mean it the way it sounded. She meant it exactly the way it sounded. A few weeks after that, Devin's son had a birthday party at the house. My mother stood near the front door greeting guests as they arrived, the way she liked to when she wanted to feel like she was running something. She introduced Devin's kids to every person who walked through the door. Her voice changed when she talked about them. It got warmer, fuller, like she was reading from a script she had loved writing. Then Lily walked by, crossing from one room to another. "And this," my mother said to the woman standing beside her, gesturing in Lily's direction with a loose wave of her hand, "is Renata's situation." I heard it from across the room. Two of the guests heard it. And Lily, who was passing close enough to the conversation, heard every single word. That night, after I got Lily bathed and in bed, I sat in the bathroom with the door locked, and I let myself cry for 5 minutes exactly. Not one more. I set a timer in my head and I cried until it ran out, and then I washed my face with cold water and looked at myself in the mirror for a long moment, and then I went back out and finished cleaning the kitchen. The third blow came on a Tuesday evening, quiet and deliberate. My mother asked me to sit with her in the living room. She had that particular tone she used when she wanted to deliver something and have it land without argument. She told me she was updating her will. She said my portion would be adjusted going forward because Devon had a real family to support. She said she thought I should be grateful I was being included at all, considering the circumstances. She implied this had already been decided some time ago and that the conversation was more of a notification than a discussion. I nodded. I said I understood. I went to my room. I did not fight back. Not yet. Not because I didn't want to, but because something had shifted the day that woman sat in the corner of the living room watching my mother put a sign around my daughter's neck, and I was starting to understand what that shift meant. I had started receiving phone calls from a law firm I didn't recognize. The name on the caller ID was unfamiliar. A downtown address I had never had reason to visit. I didn't mention the calls to my mother. I just listened, and I started to remember things my grandmother had said to me years ago that I had filed away as comfort. My grandmother passed 8 months before all of this. She was 81 and she was sharp and present until the very last weeks. She used to call me on Sunday evenings just to talk, and she always asked about Lily before she asked about anything else. She had a way of making me feel seen that nobody else in that family had ever managed. When I was about 12 years old, she pulled me aside at a Christmas gathering. She held both my hands and looked at me very seriously and said, "I made sure you'll be protected, baby, no matter what they do." I thought she was just being kind. Grandmothers say things like that. I thought she was offering comfort the way she always did, with warmth and certainty that didn't necessarily attach itself to anything concrete. I didn't know she had meant it as a statement of fact. What they didn't know was that my grandmother had been watching this family for decades, and she had made very specific decisions because of what she saw. She had watched my mother choose Devon at every crossroads, in every room, at every table. She had watched me go unacknowledged year after year, doing everything right, asking for nothing, disappearing quietly into the background. And she had done something about it in the only language that could not be argued with or rewritten. I met Miss Caldwell on a Wednesday afternoon at a small office downtown. She was older, precise, with silver hair cut short and reading glasses she wore on a chain around her neck. The moment I walked into that office, she looked at me with the particular recognition of someone who has been expecting you for a long time. "Your grandmother described you perfectly," she said. She didn't waste any time. "She told me you were the one who never asked for anything. She said to make sure you got everything." My grandmother had established a private estate years before her death, structured completely outside of anything my mother had access to or knowledge of. It included a paid-off property, a savings portfolio that had been quietly growing for years, a handwritten letter she had composed herself, and a portion designated specifically for Lily's future education, named with my daughter's full name, with instructions that it be explained to Lily when she was old enough to understand. Miss Caldwell told me to say nothing. There was a formal reading scheduled. All relevant parties would be contacted and required to attend. She told me the date and told me to be there early. I drove home in a kind of silence I hadn't felt in a long time. I made dinner. I helped Lily with a school project about animals. I tucked her in and read 2 chapters of the book she was working through, and then I sat in the kitchen in the dark with a cup of tea going cold in front of me, holding the knowledge of what was coming, turning it over quietly in my hands. Miss Caldwell had represented my grandmother for 22 years. She knew the family's history in the particular detailed way that only a lawyer who has been told everything can know a family. She knew names and dates and patterns. She told me my grandmother had not made these decisions impulsively. The estate had been structured and witnessed 3 years before she passed. It had been reviewed by 2 separate offices. It was clean, it was complete, and it was mine. Back at the house, my mother grew steadily bolder. She told me one evening that I had 2 weeks to find somewhere else to live. She framed it casually. Devin needed the space when his family came to visit, she said, and it wasn't fair to keep the back bedroom unavailable. She said it the way she said everything, like it was obvious and had already been decided, and the only reasonable response was agreement. Devin's wife had started asking questions at family dinners about my grandmother's estate. Not directly to me. She would ask my mother in a light, curious tone, the kind designed to sound like it wasn't about money even though it was entirely about money. Who was managing the property, she would ask. Whether there was a lawyer involved. Whether things had been sorted out yet. My mother would wave her hand and say everything was being handled, that it would come through her the way these things always did in the family. They were both so certain. At dinner 3 nights before the reading, my mother looked across the table at me in the middle of a conversation I had barely been part of, and said, matter-of-factly, "You've never had anything in your name, Renata. That's just the truth." I looked up. I held her gaze for a long moment without speaking. I picked at my fork. I went back to my food. I knew the date. I knew the office. I knew what was waiting in that room. And I knew she had no idea. Miss Caldwell's office smelled like wood polish and old paper and something faintly like the inside of a library. It was quiet in the way that professional spaces are quiet when something significant is about to happen. 4 chairs around a long table. A window that let in pale afternoon light. A clock on the wall whose ticking was the only sound when I first walked in. I arrived early. I sat with my hands folded on the table and I breathed. My mother and Devin arrived together. His wife was behind them, uninvited but apparently unquestioned by either of them. They came in talking, comfortable, moving with the ease of people who believe they already know how something ends. My mother sat down and smoothed the front of her jacket and glanced around the room. She looked at me briefly with the expression she had always used when she thought she had already won. A small, settled look, like a door closing. Miss Caldwell came in, set her folder on the table, and sat down. She did not make small talk. She opened the folder and began to read the terms of the estate in a clear, even voice. The property address, the savings portfolio and its current value, the education fund named for Lily, the instruction that all of it, in full, was to be transferred directly to me. The room went very still. My mother's face changed in a way I had never seen before. The settled look disappeared. Something underneath it surfaced that looked like confusion first, and then something harder. "That can't be right," she said. Her voice came out smaller than she intended. "I'm her daughter." Miss Caldwell looked at her without any change in her own expression at all. "Mrs. Holt, your mother was very deliberate about every decision documented here. She also left a separate letter for you, which I'll read now with your permission." My mother looked at Devin. Devin looked at the table. Then my mother nodded. Miss Caldwell lifted a single folded page from the folder. She unfolded it carefully. She began to read in the same even, unhurried voice she had used for the rest. My grandmother's handwriting, read aloud in that quiet office, was the most devastating thing I had ever heard in my life. She wrote about what she had observed over decades. She wrote about Devin being celebrated and about me being passed over, not once, but in pattern, consistently, across years of dinners and gatherings and decisions. She named specific incidents in plain language. She wrote about the birthday party and the word situation. She wrote about the sign because a neighbor who had been present that Sunday had called her the following week and described exactly what had happened, and my grandmother had listened to all of it without saying a word to anyone. And then came the last paragraph. Miss Caldwell's voice did not waver once. I watched you make Renata feel small her whole life. I watched you treat her daughter like a burden, while you raised Devon's children like they were royalty. I am not angry. I am tired. And I have made sure that Renata and Lily will never need anything from you. I have also made sure that you will spend the rest of your life knowing that it was your own choices made freely over many years that led to this moment. Devon pushed back from his chair. This is contestable, he said. His voice had an edge I hadn't heard before. We'll get our own attorney and we'll challenge it. Miss Caldwell reached into the folder and slid a second document across the table without a word. Dated 3 years prior. 2 independent witnesses, both with their credentials listed, reviewed and approved by 2 separate legal offices. A single clean signature at the bottom of every page. Devon picked it up. He read it. He set it back down. There was nothing to contest. There had never been anything to contest. I stood up slowly. I picked up my copy of the documents and held them at my side. I looked at my mother, who was sitting very still now, staring at the surface of the table. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Lily is not a mistake, I said. She never was. Then I walked out of that office into the pale afternoon light, and I didn't look back. Lily and I moved into my grandmother's house 3 weeks later. It was modest. A single-story house on a quiet street with a small front yard and a kitchen that got good morning light through the east-facing window. It smelled like my grandmother in the first days, faintly, just enough to make me stop sometimes in the hallway and stand still for a moment. It felt like the first place that had ever been fully, completely, unambiguously ours. My mother called twice. The first call came on a Tuesday. She left a voicemail that started with something that was almost an apology, the kind built around phrases like, "You have to understand," and "I never meant it the way it sounded." I listened to it once all the way through and deleted it. The second call came 10 days later. She needed help with a bill. I didn't answer. I didn't call back. Devon went quiet. His wife stopped sending the occasional checking-in texts she had sometimes used to keep tabs on things. Lily started at a new school nearby. On the first morning, she stood in the front hallway in her backpack and her good sneakers, and she looked up at me with the particular seriousness children bring to big days. "Are we safe here, Mama?" she asked. I crouched down and looked her in the eye. "Yes, baby," I told her. "Someone who loved us made sure of that." She nodded like that settled it, and we walked out the door together into the morning. My grandmother never raised her voice in any room I ever saw her in. She never made speeches. She never confronted anyone directly or demanded to be recognized. She just watched quietly for years, and she planned carefully, and she loved me in the most permanent and practical way she could find. She made it legally impossible for anyone to take our foundation away. She built us a floor we could stand on when everything else was unsteady. I think about that a lot now. The way love sometimes shows up not as warmth in the moment, but as something you discover later, built quietly into the structure of your life. The way a woman who had been gone for 8 months was still somehow protecting us. I won't pretend everything is resolved. Grief doesn't work that way, and neither does family. There are mornings I wake up and feel the weight of all of it. There are nights when Lily says something sweet, and I think about all the years she was made to feel like less. But then I look at this house, our house, and I think about my grandmother sitting in her kitchen making decisions that nobody else knew about, and I feel something that I don't have a better word for than held. We are not the mistake. We were never the mistake. If someone in your family ever took their anger at you out on your child, you know that's a different kind of pain. It's not just about you anymore. The sign around Lily's neck was not just an insult to her. It was a declaration that we didn't matter, and we spent years trying to earn our place in rooms where the decision had already been made against us. Subscribe and share your story in the comments. Tell me how you protected them. Tell me how you kept going. Tell me what it took. Click hype to help this story reach every parent who has had to be strong for their child when no one was being strong for them. Your story has power. If you felt a connection to mine, please subscribe and share your journey in the comments. Every hype you give this video helps empower someone else who needs to hear it. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening.